Alrighty, folks. Well, thank you so much for attending my session. My name is Mohammed Al-Khatib. I am a web developer here with the Smithsonian, specifically the National Zoo. So expect to see a lot of panda memes as we go through this presentation. Spoiler alert. Today, we're going to be talking about paragraph migrations. They have been a big stumper for us here at the zoo, and I'll go over our strategy, um, basically our problem, and what we did to overcome them. And hopefully I can bestow some wisdom on you so you can hopefully not make, you can tread a little lighter. So let me just pull up my, oh, and if you do see any feral deer behind me, let me know. Okay, so I did provide a link to a demo repo that I created, which you're welcome to view after the session. I still need to update the README file with some instructions, but hopefully by the end of this presentation, you should get a sense of what I'm trying to do there. So what are our challenges? So here at the National Zoo, we have a pretty dense website. Nationalzoo.si.edu is our address. We have a lot of data, including over 30 paragraph types and over 2,000 paragraph entities. We have a big reliance on nested paragraph fields. And of course, we also have a lot of field collections. Actually, some of our field collections are fields nested inside our paragraphs, which also adds to the complication of what we're trying to do. So now paragraphs by themselves are tricky. They are revisionable entities that rely on a parent-child relationship with their host entities. They are, paragraphs without a parent are considered orphaned, and the fate of a paragraph is determined by its host entity. So if the host is deleted, then the paragraph is deleted too, and vice versa. And you can see how this could muddy the waters with migrations as we go forward. So, and here I'm showing a couple of just some snapshots of my database program, showing the relationship between two different types of paragraphs. We have our flipbook grid. This is basically a parent paragraph entity. As you can see here, its parent type is a node, and the parent field name is a field content block. And the flipbook grid paragraph has children, like a child paragraph called the flipbook grid item. And so you can see here, flipbook grid item that I can't read, 3965 has 4 flipbook grid items attached to it. And the field they use is flipbook grid item. So I'm going to go a little bit into detail about that structure later. So now each revision also has its own entry. And so this also further adds to the mix. So as you can see here, this is the paragraph revision field flipbook grid item table. Wow, that's a mouthful. And so as you can see in the table, we have a number of different revisions that are created. Oops, I'm using a magic mouse, so it's like very sensitive to mouse rolls. So what solution did we decide to do? So we really like the idea of leveraging Migrate Drupal to manage our migrations. And that's honestly because we are a very small team and we don't have the capacity to build out a custom migration set or rely on an external vendor right now. Yeah, that's what happens when you don't have much cash money. So we're also dealing with a very data heavy site with thousands of entities. So, I mean, as you can imagine, we have a lot of paragraphs. We have also a lot of nodes, you know, and the thing I also really liked was that migration configuration files, and I'll show you an example later, can be easily tweaked and refined after the fact to suit our needs. So if you wanted to make field changes in your Drupal 9 instance, you want to, like you have a field with a really obscure name, for example, machine name in Drupal 7, you can easily do that. You can create your own, it really sets the stage for creating also your own migration plugins if you wanted to as well. Like, for example, migrating from 2 different field types, but I am not going to cover this. So this is actually not part of my presentation. There are people who do a far better job of explaining how Migrate Drupal works, and I will provide links to those resources. Of course, in the interest of time, I mean, as much as I would have loved to go over this in more detail, obviously, with time, we can't do that. So, but I will give you a quick overview. So Migrate Drupal is, this is from from the documentation on d.org, is a module that provides the capabilities for importing data from Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 and /9. And Migrate Drupal basically uses the APIs provided by Drupal's core Migrate module. Actually, Migrate Drupal is also a core module too, just so you know. And here's like a brief, diagram that I created. Please excuse my horrible box making skills. But basically, we have the Migrate API, and that is, the bottom layer that provides the interface for creating, for hooking, for other modules to hook their plugins into. We have Migrate Drupal, which sits on top of that. It provides its own set of pre-built migration plugins that we can use. And then on top of that, we also have these 3 modules that give us a lot of ease of life, that make our life a little easier. We have the Migrate Plus module, which gives an extra set of data transfer plugins. They also allow us to migrate our migration, to export our migrations into configuration entities. In fact, I think this is a very crucial or critical component to any migration strategy. It's a really good way of seeing all your migrations in YAML form in your settings. We also use the Migrate Tools, which gives us, Drush. Drush is, Drupal shell, which allows us to, batch things pretty nicely. And it also gives us a UI interface. So here's just a quick tab. This is a UI interface of, and it just gives us a list of all the migrations that we have. Forgive me, I am using DDEV, so it could be a little slow. Well, these are basically our migration groups right here, and here is the one that we created. So I will get back to that when it finishes loading. And basically, here's a snapshot of what the outcome of using the Migrate Upgrade module to well, let me actually backtrack. So I forgot. So Migrate Upgrade is another contributor module that uses all of these tools to auto-generate your Migrate Upgrade files. So your configuration files, and this is so helpful. As opposed to you having to think about manually doing your strategy, you can just use the Migrate Upgrade module to do that. So, and then finally, we have other contributor modules that kind of plug into the Migrate Upgrade ecosystem. They provide their own plugins, or Migrate Drupal ecosystem. So Paragraphs has its own plugins, like and so does Bean Block. So if you want to, from block to entity, also media migration module. So these 3 modules are examples are examples that provide plugins that hook into Migrate Drupal. But of course, we're just going to be focusing on this guy here. So, all right, now on to this slide. So this is basically a list of all the migrations that get generated by Migrate Upgrade. So I'm sure some of you here are familiar with the dump. It can be a lot of files. This includes not only data but configurations too. So now here's the catch. So Migrate Drupal is great at creating this, automatically generating all of the configuration files for you, but it does not currently support auto-generating paragraph content migrations, and that part will need to be done by hand. And this is why I'm here in front of you today. So there is an upside though. Migrate Upgrade does auto-generate migration config files for paragraph entity types and field collection types. So that the structure of the paragraphs, the fields, the bundles themselves, they can get migrated over automatically via these 2 plugins that are provided by the paragraph module. This is D7 paragraph type and D7 field collection type. And here is the as an example of the file that gets generated. So it's called upgrade D7 paragraphs type. This is already provided. I didn't build this. So, and this really helps. However, you are of course welcome to build out manually your own paragraphs in Drupal, your fields and stuff before before handling your migration. This is not a critical step to the process, but it does help. It definitely does help. So the D7 field collection type plugin here actually handles migrating, transforming field collection entities in Drupal 7 into paragraphs. So this is also a really huge benefit to using these two plugins. So, and even better, the paragraph module itself provides a couple of source plugins for migrating paragraphs and field collection content from D7. So these are basically the source plugins that we are going to rely on for creating our migration. So these are the D7 paragraphs item and the D7 field collection item. So, and you can, I mean, if you want to dig into into the code base, you can, go to the paragraph module and you can see, the migration plugins there. It'll give you a sense of how they work under the hood, but I'm not going to do that today. So there are two things to keep in mind. Paragraphs are entities in and of themselves. So when you're handling a migration, you want to visualize them as entities that are referenced. But the one key difference is that paragraph fields are entity, but they have a revision ID. And this adds an extra layer of complication. As we saw in my earlier slide, entity references usually just have one, they have an ID, and then the field calls that ID and via migration lookup. But yeah, paragraphs have an extra step, which involves having to migrate over a revision ID, and the way they're structured too also adds to that complication. But I'll talk about that later. So, but it really helps to understand paragraphs as fundamentally as entities when you are, and that each paragraph field is basically an entity reference field. So with that, and so basically that's the mindset to have, and that will help you when you're trying to visualize your migration strategy. So here's the steps we took. So the first step we took obviously was to run Migrate Upgrade, and here's, just I basically lifted this up from the Migrate Upgrade Drupal, their project page on Drupal.org. Basically, you want to install the module, and then you generate the migrations. Make sure you apply, so this is an example statement. You provide the data, your Drupal 7 URL, and then you generate the configuration YAML files by just running drush config export. And this will generate all of the files. You can see them here, basically. And then I did provide a link to Lullabot's excellent article that outlines this process. This is actually what I followed. But this is the first step we do before migrating our paragraphs, because the outcome is it will also generate all of your migrations, and they're good to go. So once you're done with that, you can move forward. So the next thing we did was we reviewed our paragraph configurations. We wanted to make sure that the paragraph types migrated over nicely. So here is, so you can see the description here is provided by the D7 upgrade, the Migrate Upgrade module. It has this little description that says, this was migrated from the paragraph bundle blocked embed, or or if it was a field collection, this becomes very useful later. So, but yeah, this is basically, you want to go here, you want to make sure that your migrations pass through nicely, make sure your fields are good. One tip that I suggest is to make sure that you enable or manage form display. You make sure that your fields are not disabled. So, and then of course on manage display, you want to use that. Either you can, that's where you handle your twig problems. And I'm sorry, I will update you Drupal after this call. So yeah, so you just want to make sure that everything looks sound. And then, so the third step, oh yeah, and so as of this point, Migrate will not tell you which fields are entity reference revision fields. So this is one caveat. So even though you're looking at your migrations, okay, here we go. So if you have any, when you generate your migrations, your nested fields, they will not automatically look like paragraph fields. So actually, I do have a screenshot of this later, but these also will need to be configured later. So the next thing is to to now start working on your paragraph migration files. So just the things, some things to keep in mind. I suggest creating a migration group for your paragraph migrations. This makes it easy to go in and run all your migrations in one fell swoop. Make sure you're using the correct source plugin. So I mentioned, field collections and paragraphs have different plugins, so you don't want to use one or the other. That can lead to that can mess things up. And of course, when you're making changes to your YAML files, which of course I'll show you on the next slide, you want to make sure you import your configuration after making any changes, because when you make changes to your config files, nothing will happen in and off by themselves. So, and lastly, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Rely on existing plugins before making your own. For example, if you have a media file inside your paragraphs, you could write your custom plugin, but there are, existing plugins either from the media migration module, as we mentioned before, or if it's a block reference field, there's the Beam block reference module. They provide their own plugins, and you can go in and look at the syntax. So let me just, wade through this example here. So these are my paragraphs. So we have an image collection here. This is one of our paragraphs. If you notice that this field, image collections, it uses the media migration delta sort plugin, which is provided by the media migration module. So I basically went into another YAML file that had a media migration a media file, a media entity reference file, and I just copied the markup and it worked. So things like that could help speed up the process. So that's my tip for you. So here's an example of an actual paragraph migration YAML file that I created. Just things to note here are the different plugins. So the first one, of course, is the source plugin is the D7 paragraph item, and this requires you to specify the bundle. So the bundle here is Flipbook Grid, and this basically, the magic trick of this plugin is that it goes into your database and it pulls all the data based upon your your Drupal 7 database. So then the process, you want to have these are the two required fields. You want to have the ID and the revision ID. And then finally, and then of course your field mappings, but this is the base. And then the destination is of course the entity reference revisions paragraph type. And of course you have to specify the default bundle. So these are the three key ingredients to migrating over your paragraphs. So, however, now the next step is to also migrate your paragraph, your paragraph fields. So the Flipbook Grid has a field on it that is a paragraph reference field, and so this is where people get stumped the most, is when how do you create a paragraph. How do you migrate over reference paragraphs? How do you attach them to their parent bundles? So, and this is basically the structure I followed. And there could be different ways of doing this, but there are two processes essentially, and that's why we use the sub process plugin. We provide the source, and then we have we want to get the target ID using extract, and we also want to get the revision ID. And let me, in the next slide, I just go over what they do. So subprocess essentially runs a set of plugins in serial order, and in this case, it's migration lookup, and then extract, and then migration lookup basically is a really useful plugin that I think is provided by Migrate Plus, I believe, or is it, maybe someone can correct me in the chat. And then you can use, and then of course, extract. So this is where things get, I mentioned earlier that paragraphs have an ID and they also have a revision ID. Well, the way they're structured in the array, like in the, makes it kind of, that's why we have to rely on extract. And actually I pulled this quote from the excellent Understanding Drupal, or the 31 Days of Migration website. Really great resource. I'm sure many of you have gone through this, but basically the paragraph lookup operation will return an array of 2 values. The format is, so the first one is the item ID, the target ID, and the other one is the target revision ID. And the array keys are not named. So to access those values, you would need to use the index of the elements starting with 0. And so that's basically what we did here. So we're doing the migration lookup, we're getting the target ID, and we're taking that array of the 2 values, and we're taking just the first one, index 0, and then we run it again for the target revision ID. We use migrate the migration lookup plugin, and then we do the extract. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail into how migration lookup works, but the gist of it is you specify the field normally, and then you specify the migration lookup plugin, and then you list all the migrations that you want migration lookup to use to get your item, to generate your references. So in this case, we have the paragraph flipbook grid item paragraph, config. So it will run this first, and then it will extract those values and then plug them into this field. So I'm not doing a great job of explaining, but I'm doing my best. So the next thing, of course, we want to be wary of are field collections. Now, when I showed you earlier, you want to pay attention to the default message that field collections. When you look at your, let's just go back here to your list of paragraph types that were, it will tell you which ones are, so if you can't remember which ones are field collections or not, it will tell you which ones are field collections. And there is a slight variation in the syntax, which I did provide in my demo. So someone is calling. And here we go. Here's an example of the differences. So the key difference here is the source plugin we use is the D7 field collection item plugin. And then we have to specify the field name, because field collections back in Drupal 7 rely on a field name. It's basically a substitute for the bundle. And then the other thing I noticed that you don't need an item ID. I can't explain why this is the case, but my hunch is because field collections, when they are created, they of course get assigned a UID or an ID, and sometimes that conflicts with a standard paragraph migration. If anybody has more information about this, let me know. But yeah, the gist of it is you just want to put in the revision ID, because field collections are also revisionable in Drupal 7. They operate pretty similarly to paragraphs in that sense as well. So I didn't put the item ID. You can certainly try to use the item ID too, but yeah, it ended up kind of messing with things. So of course, the next step 4, is to run your migrations. There are 2 ways you can do this. You can use Drush, the Drush commands provided by Migrate Tools, and you can even use the migration UI provided by Migrate Plus. So here's a screenshot of what I was showing you earlier with our migration. So here are all our migrations listed. You see there's quite a few, and these also include, of course, the field collections. And basically, it'll show you, the ID name of the paragraph. I mean, of the migration configuration YAML file, its status, and then uh, how many paragraphs are being imported or not. So, I mean, all things considered, this was a pretty smooth migration, shockingly. So yeah, but normally if you do get errors, you can get messages here. And of course, Migrate Tools will, when you do run the migrations in using Thrush, it will also spit out any errors. Most of the errors actually, and I'll go over this shortly, you know, um, they can fall into a few categories, but we'll go over that. So, and then of course you want to audit your progress, um, and that is kind of hard because there is no default way of there is no default interface that ships with paragraphs for looking at all the paragraphs you've got. Normally you'd have to go to the node and check to see, oh, all those paragraphs. Well, there are a couple of workarounds. The first one is you can of course check your database table. So if you're pretty comfortable with the database, you can go into the paragraph items field data database. That'll give you just a list of every paragraph that's been migrated over. And then you can, of course, look up the joins. And that's all well and good. And the other way is you can actually create a view of paragraph entities. And that's what I actually ended up doing. It's a really good way of getting a visual on all the paragraphs that have been imported. But I would definitely, and let me see if I can get you. I must have it here. So here is basically our view. And, I basically created a few fields. We have the item ID, we have the revision ID, we have the paragraph type, we have the parent type, and of course the parent ID. This is very critical because when you are migrating paragraphs, in theory, every paragraph has to have a parent, right? So when you are running your migrations, you want to make sure that you want to debug why if there are any orphaned paragraphs, and I'll give you a few tips after that. So yeah, so that's basically what I did to audit my progress. After I ran my paragraph migrations, I went back to my view and saw that I had a lot of paragraphs here. And I went through and made sure that things were good. And then, of course, the next step is preparing your paragraph reference field migration. So now you have your paragraphs in place. You want to now attach them to their host entities. Now, if this was a nested paragraph field, you probably already did that because when you're running your paragraph migrations, you're already running, you're already mapping all of the fields. So you have your paragraph flipbook grid paragraph, and then you have, and it has the entity reference field on there. So you've already done that, but now you want to attach them to your nodes, right? So the approach we did was we ran the node migrations first via Drupal 7 upgrade, and then we migrated the paragraphs, and then we reran the paragraph reference fields. So now there are two approaches to this. You can either modify the existing migrations created by Drupal upgrade. Going back to, this is the basic page. So this was generated by the Migrate Drupal basic page. So it uses this plugin called NodeComplete, really great plugin. So you can create a YAML file that basically leverages this plugin. And then we went into the plugin and we found the paragraph field, and then we basically applied the sub process and applied the migration lookup. By default, when this, as I had mentioned before, which might have not been so clear, by default, when you first run this, these fields just basically use the get sub, because Drupal's the Migrate Upgrade module does not know what to do with them. So it'll just give them the plugin get, uses the get plugin, and that's it, really. So what you want to do here is you want to go in and you can manually uh, change it. As you can see here, our content block um, field relies on all of these paragraph types. And how do I know this? Because if you go into your basic page, we're going to go to the basic page. And where is content block? Here it is. You can see all of these are checked off. These are the migrations basically that you want to identify in your migration lookup. So that's basically what I did. I went in here, looked at all the check boxes. I'm like, okay, so these are the migrations I need to apply here. Now there is one thing I haven't tried, which is just copying and pasting all of the migrations, and seeing if that tracks on. So, I mean, your mileage might vary. So, so you don't have to rewrite them over and over again. I'm very curious to see if there is a shorthand that we could use, as opposed to having to list every single migration. Maybe can we list a migration group or a migration tag here? So if anybody has the answer, please let me know. But yeah. And so, yeah, so here we go. This is what I meant, the field content block, and we have the get plugin. So this is what will come in before, and this is what you will do after, And I don't know, I mean, I'm hoping this presentation becomes obsolete and that this will be provided in the future. But given the complexities, I'd venture this might not be, anytime soon, which I totally understand. And then finally, I just want to give you some of the lessons learned, So one piece of advice I can give you is use a sandbox site first to build out and test your migrations before applying them to your main project. Creating a module, housing our migration configuration files really preserves sanity because, you're dealing with potentially hundreds of migration files sometimes. And it allows us to create custom plugins when the need calls for it. So luckily right now in our project, we have not needed to create any custom source or process plugins. So fingers crossed that continues, but the functionality is there. So if you can, do that, that's really helpful. The other thing is, dropping your database and starting over is fine, especially on larger migration projects like us. In fact, I encourage it because it allows you to, to set up it allows you to identify problems that might not have arisen beforehand, and the other one that I did was you can comb through GitHub for inspirations or examples. So I'm a total GitHub stalker. I went to Lullabot's repo and I found an example migration config. I went to the Boston group. They're another agency. They also had an example of paragraph migrations, and I kind of looked through those and I was like, okay, so this is what makes sense and this is what makes sense. So there are ongoing issues. One of them is, the field collection to paragraphs can sometimes lead to ID conflicts. I'm still kind of trying to debug this, but one of the ways that I did was to, like I said, remove the item ID and just let Drupal handle that by itself. And then deleted and archived paragraphs can still make their way over as orphaned entities. So this is what I mentioned, like, sometimes you'll look at your view and you would notice, we'll go back to our view here, that some of the orphaned, we have a few orphaned paragraphs that came in, they were actually deleted, from a previous revision. So they are now currently orphaned, but there is a record of them in the revision, in the revision table that said they belong to nodes at some point. So, I mean, that could, that is still an ongoing issue, but it's not the worst in the grand scheme of things. And I think there is actually a utility that allows you to delete orphaned entities, but it's always a good idea to check that, you know. And then finally, rollbacks can be tricky. Oh, um, so you know, and here's another piece of text that I lifted from the Understand Drupal website. Thank you, um, Mauricio. But yeah, so you know, paragraph migrations are affected by the particular behavior of revision entities. If the host entity is deleted and the paragraphs do not have the translations, the whole paragraphs get deleted. And so that means a node will make the reference paragraph data to be removed. So let's say you were doing your basic page uh, migration, and then you decided to roll back your, you know, then those paragraphs can get deleted. But conversely, let's say you wanted to roll back your paragraphs and re-import them, because if the basic pages are still there with it, then the paragraphs will still stay there. So this stumped me for a long time. I was like trying to roll back the migration. I'm like, why aren't these paragraphs getting deleted? Why, you know? And it turns out it's because they're already attached to notes. So I had to roll back both migrations before doing it, or I had to delete the basic page, the basic page nodes, and then rerun them again. So yeah. And finally, here's a slide of some helpful resources that I kind of used. Of course, there's a lot of really great articles on Drupal.org, so you feel free to check them out. There's also the Drupal Slack. But in addition to that, we have the overview of migrating Drupal sites by Juanpi on Lullabot. There's Introduction to Paragraph Migrations by Maurizio and Carlos Nardo. This has been the penultimate resource for me. And if you missed his Mauricio's session on Monday, oh no, sorry, on Wednesday, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's very important, informative. And then and finally, a really nice article on Medium, which was by Kevin Katz, which is how to migrate paragraphs from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9. So thank you. That is basically the end of my presentation. We have a little bit of time for Q&A. So let me know if, let me just check the Q&A tab. Let's see. I have domestic cats as part of my daily work environment. Looking at your environment, what have you seen? Um, are you talking about the zoo? Well, you know, we do work at the zoo, so we see everything. I guess that's, yeah, that's what, you know. Um, but your other question, with what I know now, if I rebuilt the site from scratch, with that is a tricky question. Probably not, to be honest. Um, I mean, you know, I was a huge fan of paragraphs at Drupal because it was really one of the only solutions for creating component type content. You know, um, but now with Drupal 8 and Layout Builder and basic block types, that is, I think, a much more, you know, it's just a much more simpler and intuitive interface for the most part. But I do think paragraphs still have their place, especially for like more basic, I think, uh, components, you know, that don't rely on like a lot of moving parts. Uh, but in terms of nested paragraphs, probably won't go that direction again. So. Yeah, absolutely, Candice. I am. I'm working on that. I'll be happy to provide my slides too. So. All right, let's see if anybody else. We still have a little bit of time for extra questions. If anybody has any more questions, I would actually love to hear from you too. So I will provide my contact information. If you have any tips that you'd like to share, please do. I do also post sometimes on the Drupal Migrate Slack channel. So if you want to check me out there, please feel free to do so, or just, you know, to say hello. Um, But yeah, that's basically the end. So if no one has any questions, thank you so much, uh, and good luck on your paragraph migrations. So I'll be hanging around here for a few minutes if anybody wants to talk. Yeah, I did. I posted a link to my slides here, and I'll post a link to my GitHub to the GitHub module. I mean, to the GitHub repo. Alrighty, happy Friday, everyone. See you around. Bye.